Today on UVA Legends podcast, I have my old pal, Heidi Brown. Heidi's an attorney, a law professor, and an author. She's written three fascinating books about managing nerves and insecurities and all the things that maybe introverts deal with when they become lawyers and other types of professionals. Heidi, great to see you. Thanks for doing this.
So good to see you. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Oh, that's great. I'm excited too. So, well, let me give your biography. Even though we're both still young, we're still have our biographies are getting kind of longer and larger. You're 81 graduate of UVA, and also
91, 91. Don't add on 10
geez,
more years. Oh my gosh.
good gracious. Sorry about that. A 91 graduate of UVA, 94 graduate of the law school. So
Yes.
you're a double who. You practiced law for more than 20 years with Wateater and Tyson's, That's Your Profit, New York City, Moore and Lee, Tyson's, and New York City. You were an associate professor at Chapman University Law School, associate professor of law at the New York School of Law, a director of legal writing program, and professor of law at the Brooklyn Law School for 7 years. And then recently, you're an associate dean for upper level writing back at New York School of Law. You've written 3 books on the present topics. You've written other books on more of your day job in terms of legal writing and research and those kind of things. But what we're going to talk about today, among other things, are the Introverted Lawyer, the untangling fear in lawyering, and the flourishing lawyer. Heidi, did I get most of that correct besides your graduation from UVA?
Yes, you did a great job. Thank you, Julian.
Okay, well, great. Well, I thought we'd start by talking about when you went to law school. Did you know the kind of stress and the anxiety and what you're going to face in not only law school, but in the practice? Did you have any idea what was ahead of you? I mean, you'd watch the law shows on TV, and we think of lawyers as standing up in court. And as you've done most of your career, many hours lawyers put in are, on legal research and writing and stuff. But anyway, what was your thought process in going to law school, and what did you know going in?
Oh my goodness. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I mean, you knew me back then. So, I graduated from UVA undergrad. I was 21 years old. And I applied to law school mainly because, I originally wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be the first female orthopedic surgeon to the, Washington football team in DC.
Wow.
But I used to faint at the sight of blood when my dad would take me to the vet with our giant St. Bernard dog. So my medical career was over before it started. So I thought, I'll apply to law school. And in college, I was a good student. I loved researching and writing. I was a quiet student, but it didn't really affect my academics because I was never the student with my hand in the air in those big lecture classes at UVA, but I took a lot of small classes, writing, language classes, and I excelled in that. So I thought law school was going to be the same. I thought, same university, some of the same professors even. I mean, my undergrad professors wrote my recommendations for law school, and some of them taught at the law school. So I just thought law school would be similar to college, which I loved college at UVA. But I walked into my first law school classroom and, I was prepared for class, but the second I was cold called by our professors with the Socratic method, I don't know if you remember when I was younger, but I had this very robust blushing response. So I turn red, beet red every time I get nervous. And when the law school professors would call on me, I had extreme performance anxiety, complete stage fright, even though I was totally prepared. I'd done the same type of preparation for class that I'd done in undergrad. So law school really rattled me from day one. And I don't think I really recovered. I mean, I got through it. I didn't do great in law school, but I ended up getting an amazing job. You mentioned Watt, Teeter, Hoffer, and Fitzgerald. I sent out 100 resumes as a 1L at UVA because I needed a job that paid. And I just happened to land a job as a 1L in my 1L summer at Watt Teeter I tell my students at a firm that specialized in construction litigation, but I didn't even know what those two words meant put together, construction and litigation.
Yeah.
So, I ended up doing that for a solid 20 years at 3 different firms and basically just faking extroversion and faking confidence, which took a huge toll on my mental health throughout all those years. It was tough.
Well,
So I
look,
wish I could go back and do it all over again, knowing what I know now.
I know, but I'm so glad you went to Wateater because I met so many people because you were there. So I don't wish you any, bad moments or anything, but
No,
so
it was a great way to learn how to be a
yeah,
lawyer, but I didn't know enough about myself at the time to know how to take advantage of the opportunities that were available to us and when
yeah,
we were at that stage.
yeah. So the anxiety that you had, the fear in law school, I had the same thing. And I'm much more extroverted than you are, but you go to law school and all of a sudden it's the cream of the creme. You figure everyone here has got to be a genius to be there. Everyone's smarter than you. Everyone acts like they know what they're doing. They're from these big Northeast Ivies, and it adds some insecurity. I think all of us, many of us felt that way. When you talk to your friends in law school, did you feel like they were going through the same thing you were, or did you feel like you were different than them?
I felt different. I mean, I do think everybody was kind of stressed in law school, but some people were seemed to be thriving in that competitive environment. And I was just a ball of nerves for 3 straight years. Plus, I had the blushing response every time. I had performance anxiety on the tests, and I wasn't really doing well. I mean, everyone else around me seemed to be getting good grades and being on law review and being on moot court teams, and I was basically just putting one foot in front of the other when I was in school. But then in the summers when I worked at Watt Teeter, I loved it. I felt like, okay, I can write. I mean, what my bosses at Watt Teeter cared about was, could I write and could they stick me in a room with one of our kind of tough construction clients and I could either calm them down or explain the law to them in a way that made sense. So I knew I could do the job when I was in the actual job, but law school just stirred all that intense fear and anxiety because I wasn't the student that was doing all the stuff that you're supposed to be doing in law school, like all the fancy stuff. I didn't do any of that.
Right.
And I thought I was a failure because I didn't do any of that stuff, which I now look back and like that, oh, that was so dumb.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, did you have the fear and anxiety that you had? Did it also bleed in to your performance on exams? So, because during exams, it's just you and the paper and the questions that they asked us. So, did you feel like that also hurt your performance? Not just this, because the Socratic method. I mean, it's great and you learn how to talk in front of people, but we're not graded for that. So, unless you decide to do a lot of moot court stuff or child advocacy stuff, you can get away with being kind of introverted, get embarrassed several times a semester, and everything's fine. But did you feel like it hurt your performance on exams as well?
It did, because I felt like law school was the language, the secret language that everybody else knew that I didn't understand. I mean, I couldn't understand the words that were even describing some of the questions on the test. And I realized, I'm not a stupid person. I'm not dumb. I read everything, I studied, but I get in that exam and I walk in there and it was like a sporting event that suddenly I'd forgotten everything I trained for. And I really like to analogize us as law students or lawyers or professors, whatever, as athletes, because it's basically training. But what I never learned was, how do I take all that training and all that preparation, and then when the stakes are higher, I'm in an exam or it's the bar exam. I did pass the bar exam, thank God. But but when the stakes are higher, how do you process, and I like the verb untangle. How do you untangle all that fear and
Yeah.
anxiety and then trust all that training that you've done, so when the performance matters, you can do it. And
Yeah.
I've studied that now and kind of the science of all that now, so I can help my students not go through 20 years of angst. But they don't teach us that in law school. It's basically this survive. In my opinion, it's like a survival of the fittest thing. You either have it or you don't. And I disagree with that. I think we all can do it. Some of us just need an extra boost to understand how we can perform at our best. Like every athlete out there, it's not like, oh, either you're good at it or you're not. It's just like we can become better at certain skills with the right coach and the right training and the right kind of empathetic approach. But empathy was not a word, that we discussed in law school or construction litigation.
Right. Um, well, I have two kids that are in college. I have another in high school, but Chandler, my oldest, he's at UVA and he's an athlete. His team went to the state finals in soccer. I remember when he took the SAT, when I took him to take the SAT, he would prepare for that like he would a game. He'd make sure he'd eat before, get sleep the night before. He'd go there. He was so used to with the high stakes of soccer games when he played midfield. there was a crowd there, one mistake and you lose. He was so used to the pressure of that that he wouldn't get rattled. Lily, on the other hand, I got to watch my voice. She's in the other room. I remember I took her to the SAT. She hadn't eaten. She would psych herself out of doing well. And the interesting thing is, I've always felt Lily was smarter than Chandler was, but Chandler's always been a better student because
Mm,
he approached his work just like he would approach his sporting events that he's done so many times under immense pressure. And I felt like Lily was a gymnast. She was a competitive cheerleader. So it's not like she didn't have pressure, but Chandler dealt with that the same way he would deal with the sports. Do you find that also the case in the way your clients and the people, your people that read your book and the law schools that you speak at, it's the same thing. Athletes deal with it better.
yes, and what I learned through writing, I wrote the book about introversion first, and what I learned from that book is this concept of somatic intelligence, and it's about how our bodies process anxiety and fear, and if we learn how and it all affects us differently. So each of us as individuals, you mentioned your two kids, they're two different individuals. If the same coach was coaching both of them, there would be different approaches because the way we react to stress and anxiety and fear is different individually. So for me, I had to learn what's called somatic intelligence to understand. I put myself in boxing lessons to do it. So the
Wow.
last 7 years, I've been taking extreme boxing lessons with a real boxing trainer to understand how I would let the stress and anxiety have a ripple effect with me with my breathing. I either over breathe or I hold my breath. Now I didn't know that back when I was working at Watt Teeter. Anytime I had to go take a deposition, I didn't understand that the reason why my heart was racing was because I was like, freaking out. But if I could understand and practice somatic intelligence as a 25-year-old associate, instead of the age I am now, walking in to give speeches in front of 1,000 people. I totally could have done that better back then if I'd understood what somatic intelligence was. And you don't have to be an Olympic athlete to practice somatic intelligence, but we can learn from how athletes train. And they get nervous, they get scared, but like you mentioned, your son, he's got a ritual or routine, or he's got like the muscle memory to understand, okay, this is just another game, this is just another performance. There's actually a UVA sports psychologist named Bob Rotella. I don't know if he's still there, but he's written a couple books on mostly golf. But I remember learning that he was at UVA, and he would teach the athletes about rituals. And it's not superstition, it's about routine and ritual and processes that we do over and over again. So when you step into that performance arena, you don't build it up in your head like it's the Super Bowl halftime show. You build it up like, okay, this is just one other shot I'm going to take, or this one other swing of the bat or the golf club. Or for me, I'm going to step into the boxing ring and do like the same training that I've done a lot now. And I do that now when I give big public speaking events, which I can't believe I'm capable of doing now. And I wish I could go back and redo all those depositions or court appearances when I had no idea what I was doing, physically, mentally, or intellectually I did, but not somatically. And the adrenaline was just banging around inside me
Wow.
ineffectively, making me less effective at my intellectual job. So I think we should teach somatic intelligence in law school, is my point.
Yeah.
My
Well,
long-winded point.
no, it's a great point. And well, in your fascinating first book, The Introverted Lawyer, it's been a few years since I've read it. You talked about introversion, shyness, and social anxiety. Now, to me, those all kind of mean something similar, but they're different. Well, can you talk a little bit about how they're different and how like one person may have two of the three, but not the other, and that could be a very different way of dealing with it.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so important to understand who we are as individuals. So, introversion is totally different from shyness and social anxiety. So, let me focus on introversion first. So, introversion and extroversion are just two different ways that we as individuals process external stimuli and how we replenish energy. So, introverts can be in really highly stimulating environments, like noise, sound, light, chaos, movement. We can function in those environments, but eventually we hit a wall and we need to get out of there and be alone or be quiet. Extroverts, however, gain energy from really highly stimulating environments. So like I'm a New Yorker now. I think of Times Square as being the obvious, like mostly high stimulating environment. Well, for me, looking back on my law practice years, going to court was like that for me, or the depositions we used to take at the firms that I worked at. We'd sometimes have 9 lawyers in the room objecting to my questions. As an introvert, I could handle it, but eventually this overstimulating environment took every ounce of energy out of me. Introverts and extroverts replenish energy in opposite ways. Like extroverts can replenish energy by being at a party, being around people, or going to a big sporting event or whatever. Whereas I need to be completely alone. I need to no friends, nobody around me. In fact, right now I'm talking to you from Italy because I needed to go away to actually get some solid writing done and be alone. You're the first person I've spoken to all day.
Well,
So that's introversion and extroversion. Shyness and social anxiety are completely different. You can be a really confident introvert. You can be a very confident, socializing introvert, but you still just need to process stuff alone. Shyness and social anxiety is an anxiety or a fear towards judgment or criticism. Now, I have that layered on top of introversion. I think I grew up. I was a minister's kid. I grew up in a really kind of sheltered, regulated um, family where there were lots of rules and there was a lot of like shame and guilt going. I mean, my parents are great, but we were raised in a very, my brother and I were raised in a very like, you don't make mistakes kind of environment. So I have this layer of shyness and social anxiety on top of the introversion, which can be really complicated to untangle. But again, you can be a very confident introvert and not be shy or socially anxious at all. But if you're like me and you wrestle with that fear of judgment or criticism, that can make things like law school hard because, especially if you have the blushing thing like me, you got 80 students staring at you if you don't understand the professor's question. And for me, litigating was like that. I had mostly men around the table at these depositions, 9 lawyers objecting to my questions. My face was on fire. I knew what the right answer was or what the right thing to do was, but my whole body would freeze. And again, that's that somatic intelligence. My fight or freeze response, I would immediately freeze and then want to run away from the situation, which you can't do. So now I've had to train myself what to do in those moments. I mean, my professor job is a lot less stressful, obviously, than being a construction lawyer, but I still do a lot of public speaking where that fear can get the best of me unless I practice all these routines and rituals like an athlete, like I mentioned.
yeah. Well, Heidi, the three that we talked about, introversion, shyness, and social anxiety, do you learn to deal with them, or can they go away? Do you always have those things and you learn how to deal with them, or they can be dismissed because of how you've learned to deal with them over the years?
So people used to say to me, "Oh, just practice and you'll be fine," or just as you get older, you'll be fine, and kind of dismissing it like this is no big deal. It'll go away eventually. I respectfully disagree with those opinions. This is stuff that I personally grapple with still, even as much work as I've done and research. I've written 3 books on this stuff, and I still can sometimes get incredibly nervous about doing a high stakes performance. So I personally don't think it goes away. I do think it's highly manageable and almost exciting when you do have to still deal with it and your process works. So sometimes I'll have to practice what I preach and do all my routines and rituals, and then I step into a performance arena and it never goes perfectly. It's I don't try to, convince myself, oh, this is going to be the best thing I've ever done in my life. But it often goes pretty great, and then I'm like, "Oh, wow, that actually worked, and it was
Mhm.
fun."
Yeah.
So I think I'm actually a better performer because I do still have to grapple with these things and wrestle with things. They have not disappeared. I've really devoted really my entire teaching career now, which has been, I can't believe I've been teaching 15 years.
Wow.
I've been focused on these issues now because would see it in my new students, and I wanted to help them not go through what I went through. Even with 15 years of solid research and analyzing myself and studying myself and practicing stuff, it hasn't gone away. It has not disappeared entirely. But I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that.
Right. Well,
It's
that
gotten a
sounds good.
million times better.
Yeah.
Let me
Well, you
say that.
sound amazing. So, well, how much of your work, a lot of your work is with your clients, people who read your books, the schools that you speak at and teach at, is getting people to understand themselves and deal with these issues. But how much of your work is trying to get the legal profession, law schools, to meet people halfway? I mean, do you spend time, working with the schools? This is how we can reach great students that can be great lawyers. With law firms, you speak to law firms about find the associate like yourself that could be an amazing person to write the briefs, to do the work. Maybe not always have to be first chair on every single matter. So you do a little bit of both?
I do a lot of that.
Yeah,
I do a lot of that. That is an uphill battle.
yeah.
I mean, and this is why I really like the athlete or performer approach, because when I first started talking about this stuff, the concept of well-being was kind of like everyone thought it means yoga and meditation. But this means so much more than that. This is really what I'm talking about is the athlete or performer model of the future of lawyers. And I think that's the only way that key stakeholders at big law firms or decision makers at law schools are going to make changes, because we all know the legal profession is slow to change. It's kind of like a system, but they think if it isn't broken, why fix it? It's kind of that mentality of we've always done it this way, and that survival of the fittest. You either got it or you don't. I like what you just said, which is, what if there are people, which I think I was one of these, who had creative ideas and really wanted to wrestle with the statutes and the cases and the facts of the case and solve a problem in a different way. What if there are lots of those people, but we're overlooking them, or we're forcing them to fit into this mold that doesn't work for them? And then because they're not the loud, gregarious, go-getting person that on the surface looks kind of fancier and what we're used to seeing on TV and in lawyer films. But what if we're overlooking the quiet ones who are really going to solve the problem that our client needs? That's what I want to change the message about. Like, I think we should change the way we recruit at law firms. I don't think it should always be the extrovert bias that the person that can do great in a 20-minute interview gets the job. I think we should be giving opportunities for quiet individuals to write something before they apply for a job. I think there's so many more like personality traits and assessments we can do on character strengths. There's this awesome one called the Values in Action Inventory on character strengths, and it gives you a report of your top 5 signature strengths. And it's the coolest stuff. Like my top 5. I want everybody to take this test. It's free, it's confidential, and it's scientifically validated. My top 5 are perseverance, zest, which I love, which is so me, with all my travel and crazy stuff I do, curiosity, creativity, and love of learning. Okay, those are my top 5. So I would love to know, we got to figure out what yours are. But
Yeah.
why would we not use something like that as a recruiting tool at law firms to understand the individual strengths that every person applying brings to the table, and then match up and pair up teams that way? To me, we could completely revolutionize the whole thing.
No, exactly right. Did you find yourself in your career, and I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you anyway, advocating for yourself and finding your role? Like I feel like you've always done a good job of finding a role for yourself at a firm that may not have had this role before you started. So anyway, how much of your time was spent advocating and finding that role that you would flourish in?
Oh my gosh, I love that that's your impression of me, because I feel like I did not advocate for myself at all when I was in
Oh,
my 20s and like in my early 30s. I feel like I mean, I think I did with certain supervising attorneys or certain partners that I work with. I think they knew that I was a writer at heart, And I really didn't like doing the performance aspects of the job. And they valued my writing, which Bob Watt and Jules Hoffer, you know, rest their souls.
Yeah.
I miss that type of mentoring. But then, other scenarios, I feel like I didn't advocate for myself. And because I had this mentality of, oh, I'm supposed to like to do these things I don't like to do. And that's the job. And this is what I signed up for. So I got to just stick it out. But where I started advocating for myself was was figuring out that my gifts lie in writing these books and teaching, and giving myself permission to leave jobs that did not fuel my soul. Honestly, I mean, that sounds cheesy, but I walked away. I have walked away from a lot of jobs in my life. I tell my students this all the time. When I graduated from UVA, I thought I was going to work at Watt Teeter for 30 years. I was going to be a partner there. And then everything changed so quick. I mean, I worked there for 6 years after law school, and my life kind of fell apart a bit. And I have reinvented myself through three different law firm jobs and three different law school jobs. And now, like, the introverted, anxious public speaker, I'm now like I do public speaking all over the world. So I think it's a matter of figuring out what we're good at and what really fuels our soul. And then you're right, like being able to articulate that to a boss or a leader, not because we want special treatment. Like, I wish I could go back and say, look, it's not that I want to opt out of doing depositions and going to court, but I want someone to teach me how to manage this extreme fear so I can do it. I didn't know how to articulate that when I was in my 20s and probably up to my mid 30s. So I know I'm rambling now, but like, yes, knowing ourselves, knowing what fuels us, knowing what we're great at, knowing what our strengths are, and then the stuff that we're maybe not so great at, being able to ask for help in a way that isn't perceived as weakness. But again, like the athlete performer thing, like if a golfer suddenly develops a problem with their putting or something, I mean, I don't know anything about golf, but or like a gymnast, like Simone Biles, like she started losing her orientation when she was in the air, even though she'd been doing this her entire life. It's okay for us to say, hey, I'm struggling with this particular skill that I feel like I shouldn't be. Can someone help me? Because I don't want to not do it. I want to do it amazingly well and prevail. That's the kind of thing I want us as a profession to start looking at seriously. And what I don't actually think I did very well until I started teaching and feeling called to write about this, research it and figure it out, and then write about this stuff, and then practice it and figure out how to improve myself before I could help my students.
Yeah. Has it gotten so that you actually enjoy the public speaking, and it energizes you? You talked about introverts and extroverts have different ways of being energized, but now that you've learned how to deal with yourself and you understand yourself better, is it enjoyable to go in front of 200 people and give a speech?
It depends. So because I do have people that disagree with a lot of the stuff or the approaches that I take, because it's different. The stuff I'm advocating for is different. I will I will say I do love it now when I used to put all this pressure on myself that when I had these speeches to do, that I had to reach everyone in the room. And unless everyone in the room was nodding along with me, that I'd somehow failed. Well, of course that's ridiculous, right? So now I set this goal for myself. If I reach one person, if I connect with one person in this room, then I've moved the needle slightly. So now that happens. I mean, usually at every big speech I do or performance, there'll be one person that'll say, "Oh my gosh, I'm an introvert too," or "Oh wow, I'm scared," or "Oh, I'm a blusher," or and I connect with people that way, and that is fun. That is fun. And then last spring, I can't believe it's been a year, I was asked to be the graduation speaker for the University of Richmond Law School, like the commencement
That's
speaker. And it was
crazy.
the biggest audience I'd ever had in my life. And I was a nervous wreck about this writing the speech. And I don't get writer's block. I write every day. It's one of my well-being pillars. I have to write or I feel very unsettled. And I had the hardest time writing that because I, again, started to build the performance up in my head like it was the Super Bowl halftime show. Like, then I was just told myself, you know what? I just got to speak to these students like I was speaking to me back at UVA when I was graduating at 24 and I had no idea what I was doing. So I approached it that way and it went fine. It wasn't, I don't think it was the greatest speech I've ever given in my life, but it was fine. I got through it and it was okay.
I'm pretty sure I listened to it. I think you posted it on LinkedIn
I did post on
yeah,
LinkedIn.
I
Yeah.
listened. I thought it was great, as always. Well, when I was started practicing law at Venable, there's a woman named Ellen Dyke, and she was married to Jim Dyke, who was the Secretary of Education in Virginia in the early '90s. And Ellen brought me in her office. And I remember she was smoking, which was normal in those
Yeah.
days. Yeah,
Jules Hopper used to smoke in his office too.
no big deal. And so Ellen was always a really busy person. I believe she a tax lawyer. I'm not sure what her practice was, but she was always so busy, always so impressive. But one day she just wanted to give me some sage pieces of advice. So I was in her office. I never really worked for her, but she just said to me, Julian, it's funny about women and men. She says, men who are lawyers, they may read they'll read the brief, they'll look at some of the research, and they'll go up and speak with for an hour with absolute certainty about everything that they're talking about. They may
Yeah.
have no idea what they're saying. A woman like me, I feel like I got to know everything about every case. I feel like it sometimes it makes it tougher on me because I feel like I may work harder than maybe I have to, or a guy will just go up there and wing it. I'm not sure if this directly relates to your work, but have you found there is an element of this? That's male, female.
I do think, yes, I agree with what everything that you just said. However, as a teacher now, I see a lot of my male introverted students. So as I run these oral argument anxiety workshops before the mandatory 1L oral argument situation, because again, it's one of those rites of passages in law school where it's like, oh, it's you have to go do an oral argument, and we're all supposed to be like, oh, yay, I can't wait to do that. And then, but no one teaches anyone how to actually manage the nerves associated with it. They
Mhm.
do workshops around here's how to be a great oral advocate, and kind of that situation you just described, how to go up there and even wing it but seem brilliant. Well, I'm focused on how do you help the students who their heartbeat is pounding through their chest and they really want to do moot court or they really want to be a litigator, but they don't know how to manage the adrenaline bouncing around inside their bodies. It is not as gendered as you would think. It is not only women that come to my workshops. There are a lot of male, introverted, really smart students who want to be good at oral advocacy, but don't have that personality where they can wing it. Now, there's a ton of students who can do that, but I'm more focused on the ones who can't. And it tends to be very blended gender-wise. It tends to be very diverse in terms of background, race, gender, upbringing. A lot of first-generation students come to my workshops on oral argument anxiety because no one has ever taught them. They haven't had a lot of role models on how to make that type of argument and feel confident. They don't feel like when I was in law school, I didn't feel entitled or competent to have an opinion on these really difficult constitutional law issues. I'm like, I don't know anything. But then there were students in the class who totally felt confident talking about that. So for me, yes, I think there are a lot of aspects of lawyering in which women do have to. I wrote something about how we had to do it backwards in high heels and um, but I see it a lot still in male students, my male students. And when I grade, so I teach legal writing. We grade anonymously to keep the grading fair. And a lot of when I reveal my grades or I reveal the names, the students submit their papers using pseudonyms, and they all pick like athletes' names or Beyonce or different rock stars as their pseudonyms. And then when I reveal who the pseudonyms match with the student, every time, every semester for 15 years, the top scorer on the graded assignment is an introvert.
Mm.
The student who never had their hand in the air in class, the quiet student who sat there and wrote and wrote and wrote and observed and wrote and really focused on the writing. And and it's been a mix of men and women to answer your gender question, over the years of teaching, it's been a mix of men and women getting those top scores, but it's always the introvert, the quiet student, and the ones that wrestle with shyness and social anxiety. So then we have to have a conversation about how do we amplify their voice outside of their writing, and that's what I like to focus on.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Heidi, things have evolved where now you hear about this introvert extrovert thing. I had never heard those things talked about 10, 15, 20 years ago. I mean, obviously they existed, but it wasn't something that we accepted and we labeled people. We didn't handle it just like that. At least I wasn't aware of that. I remember the boxer Mike Tyson and philosopher once said that the coward and the lion both have the same fear before the event. It's just the lion makes his way through it or fights through it, and the coward cowers. Do you think the way society, businesses, law schools look at these issues has evolved over the years? So over the last 30 years since you graduated law school and you've had this amazing career, has it changed? Or is it the exact same and we're dealing with the same issues we've always dealt with?
First of all, Mike Tyson is my favorite boxer of all time.
Okay.
And I love his personality now and his persona. And he also has another amazing quote. He says, "Everyone who you fight is not your enemy, and everyone who helps you is not your friend." And
Wow.
I love that.
Can I say one more Mike Tyson thing also?
Yeah.
Everyone has a plan to be hit. Everyone has a plan to be hit in the face. Okay. All right, go ahead.
True. I love him. I wish I could show you. I have a Mike Tyson trucker hat over there that I literally went running in today. So I'm a huge Mike Tyson fan. In fact, I'm kind of looking forward to his fight coming up on, I think it's July 20th.
We'll see. It's kind of like did Elvis perform too long? You know, I don't know. We'll
I
see.
want him to win. I
Yeah.
want him to win.
Yeah.
I want it to last like 9 seconds, and I want him to win.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, your question was, has the profession started to pay more attention to introversion and
And
extroversion?
not just the profession, but society. I
Oh,
mean, are these things now that do we advise people just fight your way through it? Don't be a coward. Be a lion. Or are we more helpful in helping people deal with these? And do we create jobs more likely for people who are not suffering but are dealing with certain performance issues? Yeah.
In my opinion, no. Our American society still thinks that extroversion is cooler than being an introvert, which I obviously completely disagree with. But we have our American society has a very extroverted bias. We assume that people who jump into conversations faster, who speak in meetings faster, we assume that they're smarter and more engaged and on the ball, when really sometimes it's the quiet person sitting in the meeting that is listening and hearing all these competing voices and then can generate a solution to a problem that everybody else has been talking over each other the whole time. And I will tell you where this started to change, but I don't think we capitalized on it enough, was during the pandemic, when we all had to communicate on Zoom, and suddenly there were ways for quiet individuals to engage or enter into the fray without having to interrupt somebody, because introverts don't like interrupting people. And that is the hand raise feature on Zoom and the chat. So I will tell you, if anybody started a Zoom meeting and said, "Oh, just unmute yourselves and interrupt me," I'll be like, "Well, I'm never doing that." But if the meeting leader said, use the raise your hand feature or pop your ideas in the chat, whatever, all the quiet people, because I pay attention, and I'm one of them. So, and my students were the same way. The quiet students were so engaged. They would put stuff in the chat, or they'd put links to things in the chat, or they would raise their hand. They would never interrupt somebody or just unmute or blurt out answers. And I thought that was pretty amazing. I mean, obviously I prefer being back in the classroom and not teaching on Zoom, but I thought it was a moment where we created space for quieter individuals to have voices, and things worked and functioned without and people had to listen
Yeah.
to the quiet folks. So I think there's a lot more work that we can do as a society to understand the differences in how people thrive and flourish at work, and not assume that there's one right way of doing things. I mean, I will tell you, the first year of the pandemic, and yes, it was a difficult and tragic year for the world, but as an introvert, I got so much done that year. I got a master's degree in applied positive psychology. I taught all my classes online. I wrote a book, like, because I was at home in my pajamas surrounded by all my favorite things, where I could control the lighting and the noise and the all those competing stimuli that in the office environment I literally get nothing done. That pandemic year, because I had control over my work surroundings, I flourished. And I know that a lot of other introverts felt the same way. Not that we all need to work from home forever, because I know community and interaction is essential for corporate culture and law firm culture, et cetera. But I do think there are ways that we can get that, leaders in work environments can understand how employees function at their peak. There's actually another athlete term called eyes off, individual zone of optimal functioning. It's called eyes off.
Mhm.
There's a Russian sports psychologist named Dr. Yuri Hanin, who coined that term. And it was about how individual athletes have an individualized, not a one size fits all, but individualized zone where they perform optimally. And I think we as functioning employees have our own eyes off too.
No, exactly right. Well, Heidi, how does it, and by the way, in terms of Zoom, I've done so many of these interviews on Zoom, and also, work on Zoom, that I had to give a speech like to a bar association type thing in front of people. I'm like, I don't speak in front of people. I just do Zooms now. I have to get up, and because when you're Zooming, you know how you're going to sit. You're controlling all
Yep.
your environment, and then you get in front of people, they can see your arms, your
Yep.
legs. If you're blushing, it might be
Yes.
easier to tell. All those things that you can't control. So I thought that was interesting. How does age relate to this? So social media, like my son, um, you know, uh, so he goes to UVA. This is a typical conversation we'll have. I said, Chandler, have you seen Emma around school? Emma's a girl who played on the soccer, a woman who played on the soccer team at Yorktown, and she was a really good soccer player. And he said, "Yeah, I see her." I said, "Well, do you speak to her?" She says, "Dad, we don't speak to people unless we know them." I said, "Well, you went to high school with her, you know her." And I'll talk about maybe 10 people like this. They don't speak to people unless they have a reason to speak to people. And I've learned in my career that I've had to increase my network, and my network
Mhm.
has value to it. Um, but I think social media may have changed, and maybe it's an introvert thing as well. I'm not sure, but I think social media has changed kids and changed our youth, because they reach out to people they want to reach out to. It's one-on-one connections. They may not go to bars and talk to strangers like we would do when we were young. So how do you think age and social media figures into this? I think they would probably either add, there are more folks that have these um, introverted introversion, shyness, social anxiety. Um, but but maybe it's something separate. What do you think about that?
Wow, there's a lot to
I'm
unpack
sorry.
in there. No, 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 I love it. I'm laughing because my niece, who is, I think she's 17. 17. I'm a bad aunt. I don't know how old my niece is. I think she's 17. She has way more social media followers than I do. And I'm like, how is this possible?
Yeah, they do.
Um, so so on the network, on the social media thing, I enjoy it as an introvert. I enjoy LinkedIn as an introvert because speaking about networking, when my Introverted Lawyer book came out, I finally put myself on LinkedIn. Had never used it when I was an attorney for some reason, but when my book came out in 2017, I wanted to sell that book all over the world. So I started getting on LinkedIn, and that has been an amazing platform for me as an introvert to make connections with bar associations, with law firms, with other introverts around the world, lawyers around the world that I never would have connected with. And because I love to write, and LinkedIn is a great platform for promoting writing, and and I can post things that I've written there. That's been an incredible way of expanding my social network as an introvert that I would not have been able to do by going to events or conferences or parties or anything like that. I do think that social media, and there's a lot of science about how it's damaging our students and our our youth, and my students tell me that. I this past semester I taught a course of upper level students. I've been teaching 1Ls, first year law students, for 15 years, but this year, since in my new role at New York Law School, I'm in charge of upper level students. And I wanted to create an upper level course about writer identity formation because I'm determined to get these students as excited about legal writing as I am, and also to incorporate generative AI because I feel like we have an obligation, a duty to educate our students on how to use it ethically. And so I had my students writing a lot of reflection papers. And I had 20 students in class, and several of them would write about how they don't know what their identity is because we were talking a lot about identity, having a writer identity, having a professional identity. And they were saying because of social media, since they were kids, really, my students are about 20, 22, 23. So they've had, social media has been a huge part of their lives. They're depressed and anxious, and they feel like their online identity is very different from who they are as a human. So I don't know all the psychology about that, but I do think what you're saying is there's reality there, and they're the future generation of lawyering, but also our leaders in our country, and so we need to do something about that and
Mm.
figure out how to help.
Well, it looks like you're going to be selling many more books. That's for sure. So, I mentioned your books, Introverted Lawyer, the Untangling Fear in Lawyering, and The Flourishing Lawyer. They all have really cool subtitles too that
Thank you.
as well. But how are the books to be read? Is it a trilogy? Are they sequels? Can one apply to one person but not the others? How do you think your books should be read?
Well, first of all, I also want to point out how cool the cover designs are because I'm
They are.
obsessed with the covers of my book. There's boxing to Mike Tyson. There's boxing gloves on two of them, and then the light bulbs on the introversion one. I just love. Uh, so no, they're a trilogy, but you don't have to read them in order. And in fact, I have this habit that when a book comes out of mine, I never open it again. I'm so scared. I'm so scared I'm going to see a major typo. And it's also kind of cringy going back. And, my writing's very personal. It's very vulnerable. It's very raw. So when I go back and read something I wrote 7 years ago, I'm like terrified. But so to answer your question, though, you get me so excited to talk about this stuff that I lose my train of thought. Here's how I would say to approach the books. Only introverts or maybe extroverts who want to learn about introversion need to read the Introverted Lawyer book. People who experience public speaking anxiety or performance anxiety or fear, the fear book analyzes the science of fear and kind of that somatic stuff I was talking about, what happens in our bodies when we experience the fight, flight, or freeze response. And that book, I kind of researched a couple different industries too, like the medical profession, engineering, sports, business schools, to see how they address fear, because we don't do any of that in law school. And I was wondering, do any of these other professions do that? But the one that probably is the most universal is the flourishing one, the flourishing lawyer, because in that book, I wanted to explain how it doesn't, so I got this master's in applied positive psychology, which doesn't focus on what's broken or needs to be fixed. It focuses on how we can thrive and do our best work when we're feeling good, but also when we hit speed bumps, how we can function well. And that's really what flourishing means. It's like not dwelling so much on what's broken or damaged. It's more like, okay, when we're in a kind of a stable point, how can we treat ourselves like athletes or performers and keep going, keep focusing on excellence, but honing the things that we need to level up. So that book is really more universal. The other two are dealing with more specific issues. I don't like to think of them as problems, but
Yeah,
like,
I was a couple of times I had to check myself and how I described them. That's why I kept saying them over and over again. But yeah, um,
yeah, yeah. So I think nobody would ever need to read them sequentially unless you were just kind of curious to see the evolution. For me, I think it's interesting as a writer to there's this great guy who writes about the creative process named Rick Rubin, Rubin,
I've heard of
and
them.
he says that we like a book needs to be produced by us because the book needs to be done, but we can't get mad at ourselves if we wrote something back then that we maybe would write differently now. It's like
Mhm.
every book comes into the world the way it's supposed to come into the world at that particular time in your life. So I think that's just how my books evolved. I was obsessed with introversion, and then I was obsessed with fear, and now I'm kind of obsessed with this athlete performance analogy.
Mm.
And we'll see what comes next.
So that could be the fourth. That could be the fourth book in the series.
I don't know. Well, right now I'm working on a travel memoir,
Oh, okay.
which has nothing to do with the law.
We'll
But
take a little. We'll take a little break and do a travel
yeah,
memoir, and have a glass of wine.
yes.
Um, so Heidi, when you've if people read your book and contacted you, people that used to work with you or used to work for, and read it and thought they wanted to talk to you about it because maybe they handled you incorrectly in terms of how they dealt with you socially or professionally. Has it ever had an effect on a colleague or someone you work with?
None of those individuals have ever reached out.
Yeah.
um, and it made me nervous, because I do write a lot about the experiences that I had as a junior associate. I worked at 3 firms. I worked for some really strong personalities. I learned a lot from those individuals, but it was
Very introspective people, I might say.
it was yeah, it was hard, and it
Yeah.
took a toll. And I've actually done talks to bar associations and things about, and I've written about like bullying and lack of civility and things like that, because I really don't think, I don't think they handled things as well as they could, but I also don't think that I stood up for myself. And I regret that. I regret not saying the way you're speaking to me or the way you're acting toward me or the way you're throwing things around the room at the moment is not acceptable. And I just dealt with it. And, well-meaning mentors like my parents, for instance, who never worked in an office, let alone a law firm, would be like, well, maybe you're creating this situation, or maybe you just need to toughen up. And I think that's bad advice. I think that we should, first of all, be talking about that kind of behavior as a profession, and you don't have to be mean or a jerk or yell and scream to be a great lawyer. I totally just feel like there's not a place for that in a professional environment. So anyway, I could go on and on about that, but I was nervous when my books came
Yeah.
out, and I had people read them, and obviously the publisher read them and stuff like that, but nobody that I struggled with in those past relationships has ever talked to me about it. So I don't
Hmm.
know, either they don't see themselves in the stories, which is fine, or they haven't read the books, which is also fine. I don't want my parents to read the books either. So I don't know, but I'm okay with it. I think for me, writing the books and having my own memory, and also everyone remembers things differently too. So my memory might be different from their memory, but my memory is my memory.
Yeah.
And writing about these difficult times in my life has been just transformational for me.
Yeah.
It's hard and it's embarrassing and it's very vulnerable, but it's made me the person who I am now, and able to get on a plane and go anywhere by myself and write about these things that are hard to talk about. So if I hadn't gone through the writing process and reflected back on all those really difficult times in my life, and I've had many, I wouldn't be this person I am now. And I like my life now. I love my life now.
Yeah.
It's really fun. It's really fun.
Oh yeah, I live vicariously through you on Instagram, but that does remind me of the part of you see the movie The Help when they had
Yes.
when they put the
Yes.
book out and they're in they're in the grocery store and someone's reading it and they're worried about, people are going to actually recognize themselves in their book. And
Yeah.
that was something they're worried about. Well, look, Heidi, I'm going to leave information on best way to get your books. I know it's not always Amazon. There might be better ways. So I'll make sure I leave that in the comment section, but also in the margins. But I wanted to talk a little, you mentioned AI,
Mhm.
and I want to talk about that, not just with regards to legal writing, but generally. And the reason why is because AI is something that can help all of us. And even though lawyers are going to be dealing with it because it's going to be ways for them, when me and you first started using Westlaw and Lexis, we didn't use it on everything. And as time went by, you had to use it because it was cheaper. And I think AI is probably going to have the same effect on legal services, obviously, as well. Anyway, I like to write about different things. As you probably remember, I'm like you, I'm always writing something, and I love to write. And recently, I noticed that LinkedIn had an AI section, so you can write a post, and you don't have to go to Chat GPT or whatever. You can just do it right in LinkedIn. I'm not sure how good it is, but I've gotten in the habit of quickly writing something. I do a lot of essays about sports and horse racing or basketball or whatever I happen to write on. So I just write, I always write quickly, but even more quickly. And instead of editing, I go back and edit. I would put it into the AI, let it work with it, and then see what I get. Sometimes I love it. I'm like, wow, this is great. Other times I absolutely can't stand it. And it doesn't work at all. It doesn't say what I want to say. Generally, how do you think people could use AI and not feel guilty, like they're losing the ability to write well? And what do you think about people in writing generally? How do we use AI to become better writers without giving up what makes us unique and what makes us different?
I love this question because as a legal writing professor, when I first heard about ChatGPT, I had a panic attack. I thought, oh no. And as a person who loves writing, as you do, like the process, the struggle, the choices of words, I love that. And I thought, oh no, and now I love AI because I think AI, like the eyes off thing, the individual zone of optimal functioning, it's going to be an individualized relationship that every writer or every person has with AI. It's going to be different for each person. I was telling someone the other day that for legal writing, I think AI can either be the go-to tool for someone who actually doesn't like writing and have it do the first draft, or for people like us, it can be this enthusiastic companion. I think the so like for me, I'm in Italy right now. I'm working on a little bit of travel memoir writing while I'm working on some stuff for school. And what I figured out is that I'll have the document open that I'm creating myself, and then I have Chat GPT open, and I'll be like stuck on a verb. And instead of me using the thesaurus tool on Microsoft Word, I immediately asked ChatGPT, hey, can you give me 5 alternative, like zestier verbs for this action? And not it's better than using a thesaurus because I can say, because the context that I want this action to be in is XYZ. And then it'll give me 5. And then I'll be like, oh, number 2 is great! Exclamation point. And then it writes back to me, so glad you like it! Exclamation point. And then the chatbot and I are in this fun conversation where I feel motivated and stimulated. And then if the word is not exactly right, I push back on it. I'll be like, no, I mean this context, or I want it to be more positive. Right? Like for instance, today I said, please give me 5 alternative words for the word challenge. And it gave me all these negative words like obstacle, hurdle, struggle. And I'm like, no, I want a challenge to be something that's exciting, or that I'm ambitious and I want to accomplish it. So then it gives me 5. I can't do that as fast with a thesaurus tool, right? So while you and I still love the actual process of writing, and I don't think AI is ever going to replace that for you, for writers like you and me, because we would miss it. It's good for our mental health. Like I need to write, like I said, every day, or I feel weird. But for people who don't like to write, it can be a writer's block fixer. It can get words on the page faster for them. So then maybe they can do the tasks that they enjoy doing more in work, because the AI can do the tasks that they enjoy less. Now, where I think you mentioned something about, well, where I get worried is if people are using it and skipping over the learning. So, like for my students, for instance, I worry that we're going to skip over the task of them learning to analyze the law just because they think that this chatbot can do it for them. But they're not going to know whether the chatbot's output is any good if they haven't gone through the learning process of writing a piece of legal analysis themselves. So I still think that we need to insist on training, whether it's in law school or the law firms, training lawyers to still have to write. So then when they do use AI, they're able to discern whether the output is any good or not. This is where I think we can borrow from the medical profession. Medical profession, medical schools teach see one, do one, teach one. See one, do one, teach one. They show how to do a procedure. The students have to do it themselves. And then to solidify the learning, they have to teach that same task to another person. I think we can apply that in the context of AI, where we as lawyers or writers see a genre of writing, and we read a lot of genres of writing, right? Like you talk about essays that you've written, et cetera. There's a genre, there's a format. We do one so we know what the struggle is, and then we can teach AI how to do it well. Or teach AI. What I'm working on this summer is figuring out how to teach AI to give us feedback on a piece of writing to see if we did it well. Or, like you said, run a piece of writing that AI generated back through itself to see how they can make it better. So that's my approach. I am over my panic attack. I'm all in on AI. I love that the way I use it. It's very encouraging. It's like an enthusiastic, writing partner with lots of exclamation points. Wasn't that a Seinfeld episode?
It was. Yeah. I didn't see the exclamation points.
I have a great relationship with my AI tool. It's very positive and uplifting, and I like it that way. So,
Exclamation point. Now, how about the way how about the way I use it though, the rewrite? Do you like that? Would you rather give it ideas and hey, write me an essay about about so and so, or do you like the way I use it in terms of rewriting it and maybe make it a different style? Are there places for both uses?
I think there are, and that's your individual thing. I mean, I have definitely tried to get it to generate content from scratch. Like I tried to get it to write that graduation speech for me for scratch, and I thought, I'm not going to use this. I want to write my graduation speech myself. But to get over writer's block, I said, please, this is the first time I used ChatGPT in my lifetime. I said, can you please write a 10 to 12 minute graduation speech for law students with these 6 themes, and make sure you throw a U2 quote in there because I'm obsessed with U2. And then it did it in 10 seconds, but it was boring, right? So then, but it got me over my writer's block because I thought, oh, I can write way better than that.
Yeah.
So I think there's all multiple uses. I think if you have a great idea and you just feel like sitting down at the page first, then having it edit for you, great. If you want to see what it comes up with on its own first and then you edit, great. I think we have to experiment because these tools are going to get better, first of all. And I just like viewing it as a partnership instead of a replacement for us as writers.
Yeah.
So
So that's great, Heidi. And what do you think the effect is going to be on law schools and on the practice of law? You've got lots of experience as a law school professor, and you got 20 years plus experience in practice at all different types of levels, different cases. How do you foresee it affecting law schools and the practice of law?
well, I think law schools and the practice of law are wrestling with how it's what we're supposed to do. Like there's all this media hype and media pressure that we all have to adopt this at the speed of light, and if we don't, that we're behind. But I think I like to refer to it as shaking hands with generative AI. Like we're shaking hands with this thing we don't know yet, and we have to introduce ourselves to it and get to know it and let it get to know us. And we got to start doing that now. So a lot of law schools and law professors and educators are freaking out because they think, oh, students are just going to use it to cheat. So we have to ban it. But I'm kind of the mindset that no, like there's this professor named Scott Graham who wrote an article in response to an article in the Atlantic saying the college essay is dead, basically writing it over. And Scott Graham said, no, we have to, like, banning things to prevent cheating is the worst thing you can do in this situation. We have to teach how to use it ethically and responsibly. So then we as users evolve as the technology evolves. If we just put our heads in the sand or ban it from use in law schools, and then the students graduate and don't know how to use it, and then the law firms are expecting them to use it, that's a complete disconnect. So I think as legal educators, as law firm decision makers, we have to be talking to each other because everybody is trying to sort of be the first to market on they either don't want to deal with it at all or they're racing into it. I think like too quickly without really experimenting with it, like you are, like I am, like we need to practice it. We need to see what it's good at. We need to admit out loud what it's not good at. But when it fails at something, like when you said you got something, you're like, oh, this is terrible. You didn't say, oh, I'm never using this tool again, right? You said, oh, that was bad. I'm going to try it a different way. And that's what we got to do. We don't know anything right now, and so we just have to keep playing around with it, messing around with it. And personally, I think that's fun. I've been experimenting with having it create images for me because I do have a very creative mind. Like I designed my book covers myself, but I didn't know, I had the idea, but I didn't know how to make them into the images. You need a graphic artist for that, right? But now for my own PowerPoint presentations and now I'm writing these travel blogs. I love getting onto Chat GPT 4, which has that DALL-E, it's called DALL-E is the artistry.
Mhm.
And I can take these crazy ideas that I have in my head and explain to it, prompt it how to create the image for me, and it does it.
Mm.
And sometimes again, I'm like, oh, that's terrible, or it has weird biases in the images, and I'm like, no, absolutely not. But then I have to have a dialogue with it to tell it what to change, and it does. And then it creates these images. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that together with this tool, I came up with this thing that I could have never painted or drawn in a million years. I don't have that talent, but I have the idea, and that's what I think is cool.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome, Heidi. Well, look, Heidi, I want to ask you one last question. And it's kind of I know you probably think it's like a cheesy interview question, but I am dying to know, you've done a lot of work on yourself and a lot of introspection in your lifetime, in your career. And you've actually, part of making a living is on working on yourself and working on people, which has been great. I think you're helping a lot of people and you're so talented in what you do. I, implore folks to buy your books. But that being said, if you had a chance to do it all over again with what you know now, would you want to do it? I mean, would you want to even go to undergrad again, or even start out of law school? Would you do it all over again, knowing how to deal with the anxiety and the introversion?
Oh my gosh. It's funny you're asking me this question because I literally wrote about this morning that if I had to do it all over again, I don't think the law was the right profession for me,
Hmm.
honestly. I mean, I think it's led me to an amazing life that I have now. And if I hadn't gone through all those hard things that I went through, I mean, I think I could have handled a lot of the hard things I went through very differently, obviously. But if I hadn't gone through all those really difficult times in my life, I wouldn't have built this incredible life that I have now. And I feel very fortunate, although it wasn't easy, it was hard to build
Mhm.
it. But in terms of a profession, I wish that I had given myself the chance to like travel and study in a foreign country and tried to be a writer at a younger age because although I mean now that I'm saying that out loud, I don't think I would have had the life experience to write anything back then. Um, but I think personality wise, the way that I went through my career in my 20s was really not conducive to me performing at a level of excellence.
Mhm.
um, it was the wrong a lot of the wrong environments for me to
Mhm.
really be my best performer self. But also, I didn't know how to explain what I needed at the time. That was a terrible answer to your question.
No, it was good, but part of what you do is you infringe or you encroach on psychology and
Yeah.
other types of social science. Um, do you have other areas that you want to tackle, like maybe personal other things you want to tackle, or do you think you'll mostly be focused on introversion and shyness in that aspect?
I think creativity is something that I would love to research more. I think I didn't realize that I was a really creative writer in my 20s at the firms, but I was. And I think that's what, it's fun talking to you because I haven't really thought about like Jules Hoffer and Bob Watt and some of the people that I think saw something in my writing back then that I think I squashed for a couple years. You know, and so creativity as a superpower in lawyering, I think is something that would be interesting. I mean, people have written about creativity in law, but I want to inspire my students, especially as a writing teacher, to explore their creativity because I think that legal writing is so rigid and so
Mhm.
boring, and to me, it's not. Like if you can write that zinger of a theme sentence in a brief that's going to captivate your judge, I mean, that's amazing. So that would be an area that I would like to explore. The somatic intelligence stuff, I think is huge. I think could be transformational for law students and lawyers to really understand what's happening in their physical bodies when they're not even just the negative stuff when you're afraid, but like when you're excited, when your adrenaline is pumping in a good way for you to succeed, but knowing how to manage that. And that's something I think we could learn from athletes. Like what if they're overhyped for a game, they're excited but maybe being too hyped up, they can toggle it back a little. I'd like to explore that. Yeah, those are my thoughts at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. Well, just real quickly about the creative. I always felt like legal writing, it's conducive to creative because there's a formula for most of it. So you'll have to be creative a few times. It's not like
Yeah.
when you're writing a piece, you're creating it out of nothing and you have an idea and you have to create a lot. I like the fact that you can have these incredible creative spots in a brief or a memo, whatever you're doing. And the rest of it is pretty formulaic. So you can get it done. So I actually like that part of writing.
I do too, and that's where AI I think fits in because what we write as lawyers, it's like a genre. There's patterns to it. There's a rhythm to it that we expect to see. And so if we teach the AI tool what that pattern or formulaic, template is, and then fill in the stuff that doesn't need to be creative, like the statute is the statute, the holding of the case is the holding of the, we're not going to make that stuff up or use zesty verbs for that. But so all that stuff we can fill in, and then it's our artistic creative thought processes that can make that heading really powerful, or that, like, I just taught theme sentences, so that's why that's in my head. But like that
Mhm.
theme that captures like the bigger, even in our construction cases, there was always a theme to what was going on in that case. It wasn't just, oh, it's a breach of contract. Well, why? Why was it a breach of contract? That's the thing that makes legal writing creative and problem solving. And I think that's where we, with our unique human brains, can pair up with AI and write and level up our writing. And I think that's exciting.
Yeah, it is. Well, Heidi, look, this has been great. I'm glad we finally did this. This was fascinating stuff. A lot of the stuff that I've thought about over the years in different ways applied. So it was really fun to talk about. And also as I deal with my kids have the same issues. So I've really enjoyed this. I hope I didn't keep you too long.
No, great.
But
It's
yeah,
great.
but this has been
Although
great.
it's totally wine time in Italy right now. It's 7:30 p.m. So
Oh, you're so lucky. I got a while to go, but it's 7:30 somewhere, right?
true.
Yeah. But anyway, this has been great. Thanks so much for joining me. And maybe at some point we can do this again. So,
Yes, absolutely. I would love to. That would be great. You're an amazing host. Thank you very much.
oh, well, thank you. Thanks for doing it. You're great. So anyway, I'm going to shut this off. Take
Okay.
care. Bye.